Hi everyone, and welcome back to Lemon Dew. I'm Brie, and in today's episode, I'm going to be talking about autism and my experiences with growing up in a toxic family environment. So before I begin, I'm just going to relay some disclaimers and also explain how this episode is going to be divided, as of course there will be two parts. So in terms of disclaimers, there will be some trigger warnings, mainly in relation to emotional and verbal abuse/neglect, as well as gaslighting, and also hints of depression and possibly suicide. And then in the second part, there will be instances where sexual abuse will be referred to. So the way today's episode is going to work is that I'm going to be sharing my experiences in part 1, and then in part 2 I'm going to be inviting my mum to share her own experiences of what it was like growing up in a toxic family environment where she experienced sexual abuse. Of course, I did ask her if she was okay with sharing her experiences, and she was fine. Now, of course, if there are any instances where certain parts of today's episode are too upsetting, then you don't have to listen. Either that, or you can just skip to parts where you feel more comfortable. So, without further ado, let's begin. I also wanted to mention today's episode is probably going to be a little bit of an emotional one, mainly for myself personally, because this is where I have really started to dig into my past, and I guess coming from personal experience, it's taken me a long time to realize how certain family members were towards myself, as well as my mum and even my dad. Now, another thing that I wanted to mention in this particular episode is that in previous episodes I've done in the past, since starting this podcast, I did hint some experiences regarding my toxic family environment, but of course today is where everything is going to come out. And of course, a lot of people that know me in real life are aware of what I've been through. And for those who haven't had any sense of awareness, this is probably going to be new. So without further ado, I am now going to begin, finally. So during my childhood, I did grow up in a two-parent household. So I grew up with my mum and my dad, but obviously, as of now, both my parents have been divorced since May 2021. So my mum has a Jamaican background and my dad is British, but his family have a Bayesian background since they come from Barbados. For the most part, when it came to my childhood, I would definitely say that I was lucky to have a good relationship with my parents, especially my mum. Now, in the case of my mum, and I've always said this to a lot of people who know me in real life, she is honestly one of the main people I have always been closest to from the day I was born to the present. She is the person that I tend to admire the most because she's really strong when it comes to dealing with personal issues. And another thing that I've always admired about my mum is the way she fought for me to get the support I needed when it came to my education. So obviously, if you've listened to my previous episodes regarding my experience growing up with autism in the education system, I struggled a lot, especially in secondary school when I was being bullied and driven to near suicide. And my mum was one of the few people in my family that actually gave me the support and helped me. Now, with my dad, I wouldn't really say that I had a bad relationship with him. However, when it came to experiences of being abused by his family, there were instances where he would be in denial. So I guess looking back at personal experiences, I think with my dad, and I know he doesn't see things this way, but I feel that his family have always sort of dictated his way of thinking, if that makes sense. So what I'm trying to kind of explain here is that when it came to my dad and his family in particular, if there was an instance where I was being abused by one of his family members, he had a tendency to sort of stick up for them. And I would always be in a position where I felt like I was in the wrong. So it was almost as if I was walking on eggshells when I was around his family members, because there was this poor treatment. So in the case of my dad's family, to be more specific, I had always known from probably about 7, when I used to be dropped off at my grandma's and stuff, that I was treated differently than the rest of my cousins who were older than me. So because I was the youngest out of all my cousins and my dad's side of the family, there was sort of this thing where there was one rule for me and another for everybody else. So if, for example, there was a family event that I had to attend, like a wedding, I would have to dress in formal clothing, but then the rest of my cousins wouldn't have to do that. They could dress any way they wanted, but I was the one who had to look a certain way. And I guess when it came down to it, I wasn't really allowed to express myself, and I was having to conform in order to fit the expectations of my dad's family, in particular his mum. And even though by blood, yes, she is my grandma, I just refer to her as my dad's mum because I don't see her as family. I don't. Now, you know, there were instances where I remember being at my grandma's, and this is referring to my dad's mum, you know, so like as a kid, if I was on like a school holiday or something and both my parents were working, I used to be dropped off to my grandma's quite often. And I remember there were instances where certain situations would take place and I would always be yelled at, you know, like if I wanted to go home or, you know, I was upset about something. One of the things I remember was my grandma often yelling at me and telling me as a child, like from the age of 7, that I was stupid and ungrateful. And at times this would happen in public areas too. So when I used to go shopping with my dad and grandma and I was feeling fidgety or antsy or something, she would yell at me in public and my dad would sit there or just yell at me along with her, and I would be so upset. And I guess at the time I wasn't really sure how to address the situation because I never really told my mum about some of the experiences I've had when I used to be around my dad's family until my late teens. And I guess it's because as a child, because my brain wasn't fully developed yet, I couldn't really understand that the way I was being treated was so poor. And it wasn't just my grandma who would treat me poorly. You know, my uncle, as in my dad's brother, would treat me poorly as well. So like he had a habit of yelling at me, and I remember even in my own house as a kid, whenever I would do something, he would have this tendency to yell at me, and my dad would just like sit there and let him do that. And there were instances as well where I used to be scared, you know, because like if people yelled at me as a child, I would be really scared because as a kid, you know, if somebody is having a go at you and your parent, the same person that is supposed to protect you, is standing there and allowing something to happen, it just makes you question, who do you go to if somebody is treating you poorly? Because you can't go to anybody. And the times where my dad's brother would be like that towards me, my mum would often be at work. And I remember as a kid, I would call my mum a lot when she was at work and telling her what had happened. And at times, if he came to the house, I'd lock myself in the toilet because I just didn't want to be near him. And the last time I remember having an interaction, I wouldn't really call it an interaction, but the last time I remember having an interaction with my dad's family, I think it was in 2021. So this was after my parents were divorced. And I remember my dad's family coming into the house to help my dad move his stuff. And I locked myself in my bedroom. So I was sitting near the door, locking myself away because I did not want to be around these people because of how they used to treat me in the past. And I remember one of my aunts opening my door, saying hello to me. And I felt that my boundaries were completely disregarded because it's like you're just coming in my room acting as if you want to have a relationship with me when you hadn't even seen me in more than 4 to 5 years. And then because I didn't come out, my uncle, as in my dad's brother, actually yelled at me through the other side of the door and referred to me as a half-breed, saying that I had no front. And I was really close to calling the police because I felt unsafe in my own home. And my dad, again, didn't really do much. It was like he just sort of letting these people treat me a certain way. And even with my cousins, I felt most of the time certain cousins in my dad's side of the family would always talk to me in a very patronising tone. So like I was saying earlier, because I was the youngest out of my cousins in my dad's side of the family, they would treat me like a child. And I think being autistic just sort of added on to that, because it would make me feel as if I didn't know anything about the world and I didn't know what I was doing, and I had to shut up and respect my elders. And it was just, it was just absolutely wrong. And even when I was 18, 19, and I went to my last couple of family events with my dad's family, they always used to talk to me in a patronising tone. Even when I was drinking alcohol, despite being of age, I would have one of my cousins lecturing me, asking me if I'm too young to drink. And what was ironic was the fact that they had a child of their own and they're talking down to me as if I'm a child when clearly I'm not. And it's just really annoying knowing how they would treat me, And another thing when it came to family events, from what I remember, was that when it came to my dad's side of the family in particular, I was always expected to attend family events. If I didn't attend a family event, I would often have people saying that I should come out and socialise, or people asking me, why don't I come out? Why don't I socialise? And whenever I used to attend family events with my dad's family, the main issue was that I was expected to put in effort for these people who did not give a shit about me. And when it came to me, no one showed me love or care. Like when it was my 16th birthday, my mum invited everyone in my dad's family, like my aunts, my uncles, my grandma, my cousins, my granddad, etc., to show up. And only 3 people showed up, and they barely said anything to me. They said nothing to me. The only thing that happened was my uncle, again, my dad's brother, basically leering at my mum. And I had no idea this was happening on my 16th birthday until she told me. So that was pretty much the only thing I remember anyone in his family doing. Not once did anyone acknowledge my presence, and it was like I was just pretty much an afterthought. And it wasn't just in relation to actually attending family events, it was actually being there. You know, when I was there, I felt like I was suppressing my true self, you know. I was having to be this perfect little girl that everyone expected me to be. And I couldn't have an opinion about anything. I just had to be a submissive person. And that was it. Because the way my dad's family are, they are very controlling people, especially my grandma. So, you know, she, I would say, has a very funny way of expressing herself, to put it lightly. So from what I used to see, you know, when it came to my dad in particular, it was like she would always try to influence every single decision, even today, because where he lives at home with her, he is basically her primary carer. So he goes to work and takes care of her. And I've always said to my dad that it would be easier personally to stick her in a home. And yes, I know it sounds a bit mean, but then again, I can't really feel any emotion at this point. But I've always said to my dad to do that because it would be easier for him, so he's not stressed. Because although he says the rest of his family take care of his mum, there's that part of me that knows that's probably not true, because where he lives with her, he is pretty much the primary carer. So back to family events and such, you know, I was forced to doing things I didn't want to do. I was forced to socialise with people that didn't really know me, forced to eat certain foods that I didn't like, because where I've mentioned before that since childhood I am very picky with foods, it's because there's certain textures that don't sit well with me. So, you know, certain types of textures of food make me feel sick, like baked beans, for example. So, you know, if something that had an awful texture was served, I would have to eat it. And I wouldn't be allowed to eat food before going to a family event if it was something I didn't like. And mind you, when I went to one of my cousin's baby showers, I did eat my own food that I cooked before going, because I had no idea what was going to be served. And when it comes to meat and fish in particular, I'm very funny about who cooks things, because you have people who cook raw meat or raw fish, and it's not something I would ever want to eat. And, you know, even if somebody in my dad's family served me raw food, I would have to eat it. I would have to eat it because that was what they wanted me to do. Just like how I had to dress a certain way because that was what they wanted me to do. I was not allowed to have any form of self-expression or individuality. It was all about what they wanted, and that was it. And another thing that I kind of wanted to mention as well was with my grandma in particular. She never really liked my mum. I'll just put it that way. I don't really know why she never liked her. And what was really funny was also the fact that when it came to my dad's family, I actually do remember at some point my mum was sort of telling me that my dad had previous partners who warned her about his family because of how controlling they were. And it kind of made me feel relieved in a way, because I wasn't the only person who could see that. And my mum even mentioned 2 other grandkids. I've never met them before, and they never got along with my grandma either. They were, I guess, treated poorly too, like me. And again, it made me feel relieved because I wasn't alone, and I wasn't the only person who could sort of see these people for what they were. But when it came to the way I was treated, and I sort of told my mum everything, she always blamed herself. And I guess even to this day, she always blamed herself for dropping me off there and for not seeing what was going on. But I don't blame my mum, you know, like, I never did. And even today I still don't. But I guess just being a kid, you know, and being treated that way by my dad's family, especially when certain things had happened, like the time I broke a picture frame by accident and I was yelled at for no reason, you know, it just makes me feel really upset and emotional sometimes, because I always used to sort of question if something was wrong with me and if I did something to upset someone. I guess there's that part of me that was looking for a form of love from extended family, and I never got it. You know, I never did. Now, in the case of my mum's family, the only people that I really talk to nowadays are my aunt and my great-grandmother, who are basically the only two other family members besides my parents who are genuinely there for me. So the thing with my mum's family is that generational abuse has existed for quite some time. So my great-grandmother and her siblings never got along. My grandmother and her siblings never got along. My mum and her siblings never got along. And I guess with my mum, she always wanted to prevent me from being involved in family drama. Now, when it came to my mum's family, I felt like there was a sense of emotional neglect because I never really was treated well. You know, again, like my dad's family, people would expect me to put in effort for them by showing up to family events and such. But then no one would do that for me. No one would ever do that for me. And where I've had a cousin who I was really close to, you know, die due to being murdered 2 years ago, there was that part of me that assumed that my mum's family would put their drama aside to support my aunt. But even so, nothing really changes because no one in the family makes the effort to contact her at all. And, you know, I remember a couple of months ago in April this year, when it was her birthday, I took the day off work and basically planned a whole day out. And she had never had any kind of experience like that before from any family member. And no other family member has even given myself that experience. I mean, when it was my 25th birthday, besides my parents, my aunt was the only person in my mum's family who actually knew it was my birthday and made the effort to show up for me. And no one else did. Nobody else ever did, you know. And I think when it comes to my mum's family, personally, there's just this lack of interest, especially where my grandmother is concerned, because I've always felt like she preferred certain cousins to me, you know. So it was like my uncle on my mum's side, his children seemed to be more the favourites, and my uncle is the favourite out of my mum's siblings because it's like in my grandmother's eyes he can do no wrong even though he is a piece of shit. I mean, this is the same so-called uncle who basically told me to go fuck myself in public in front of my aunt. And this was when I was signed off work in 2023 because I was going through clinical depression. And, you know, you had the audacity to basically ask me if I was doing all right when clearly you could see that I wasn't. And, you know, because I told you I wasn't doing fine, you told me to go fuck myself and reduce me to tears. So that's the kind of interaction I get. And in the case of my grandmother as well, I don't really feel anything towards her. Like, she is sick, and my grandmother on my dad's side is sick as well, but I don't really feel anything. I just don't, because they never put in the effort to have a proper relationship with me. And it's like, why should I, you know? And I guess I can say with my grandmother, on my mum's side, I felt like she was not a good parent to my mum. You know, hearing some of the things my mum went through and just sort of hearing some of the names and things that my own grandmother would say to my mum, it's like, you know, it just makes me feel nothing, really. And, you know, again, like my dad's family as well, I never really felt like I belonged in my mum's family. I was always pushed aside for someone else. And, you know, most family members would sort of try to form a relationship with me, but again, it was too late. You know, they never took the time to understand me. They never even took the time to understand what it was like for me to grow up with autism or depression. They would just treat me like shit. So to them, I was basically like trash. Now, the last time I do remember visiting my grandmother, I think this was during the pandemic. I actually don't remember because it's literally been about 4+ years or something. And I remember the whole time I barely said a word. I was just on my phone because I felt out of place. And I remember she was showing me a picture of one of my aunt's babies. And this is an aunt that I have no relationship with. And she showed my mum the same picture. She wasn't interested. I said I wasn't interested. And then my grandmother said to me that I wasn't interested because my mum said so. And I was just thinking to myself, you can't actually be serious, because this is a family member that I haven't seen in years who actually forgot my birthday. And at one point when I had a phone conversation in my teens with this person, they asked me how old I was. And I was about 15 or 16 years old. And it's like, you're supposed to know these things. You're supposed to know me, and you don't. So, yeah, that's why I wasn't interested. Because how am I going to be interested in somebody's kid if this person has no relationship with me? And, you know, when I remember when I left with my mum, I said to my mum, I don't want to go back there because I'm not going to put myself in a situation where I'm going to go somewhere where I don't feel like I belong. And every time there were family events that would take place, it was easier for me to say to my mum that I'm not going because I'm not going to feel comfortable. How am I supposed to feel comfortable somewhere if I can't be myself? Whereas with my dad, it was harder to tell him because where his family had emotionally and verbally abused me for so many years, it was so hard for me to come out and say how I was feeling. And every time I tried, I was met with denial. So I used to make up excuses saying that I had to do coursework for my education or whatever. And in my late teens, when I started working, I'd just say, oh, I have work or whatever. So I would just make up an excuse. And even though my mum would try to help by pushing me to talk to my dad, there was no point because he was going to say that no one in his family did anything to me. And, you know, another traumatic thing I remember was when my dad's mum, my grandma, used to call the house phone. And I remember every time my dad would get me to talk to her, I'd lock myself in the fucking toilet because I was basically going to be in a phone call with a person that emotionally abused me. And it was just a lot, you know, being a kid and knowing how your extended family treats you like that is so much to deal with. And I guess looking back, I kind of realize that I don't need these people. I don't need people in my life who are going to display toxic behavior to me. And I don't need people who aren't going to respect my boundaries, because most of my extended family never respected my boundaries. Like, you know, for example, I didn't like physical contact and people would still hug me, even though I don't want people touching me, you know. That's like basically having sex with a person that was raped, you know. They're not going to feel comfortable. But my point that I'm trying to say here is that I really don't need these people in my life because I am 25 years old now, and I'm at a point where, to be honest, the ideal family image is something that makes me feel sick. And I'm going to say that because when I look at blended families and large families, there's that sickly feeling I get because I never really had that kind of thing ever in my life. And I feel like because I've witnessed certain things or heard certain things, I've had a very skewed perspective on Black families because, yes, in every single race, you have dysfunctional families. But what bothers me about Black families in particular is how broken they are, because you have so many families that have single parents where the children don't know who their biological mum or dad are. And then when it comes to abuse, it's very common for Black families to disregard it because it happens most of the time. You know, like in my mum's culture, for example, you know, the Caribbean culture, if you have a kid that gets abused, half the time the family's not going to believe you because they're going to see you as a troublemaker. So you either have to hide what has happened, or you're going to end up going to a mental institution or something because people think something is wrong with you. And this is the problem with the Black culture, in my personal opinion, is that abuse is normalised, especially sexual abuse, and things like that make me feel sick, you know? And nobody takes the time to get to the root of the issue. No one. People just sit there and let it happen, and I just feel sick knowing that today things like this are normalised. So, yeah. So that was pretty much part 1 of my episode where I talked about my experiences with autism and toxic family members. So I am going to be pausing for a short break, and then in part 2 I'm going to be inviting my mum to share her own experiences, and we're also going to do a little bit of exploration in terms of how generational abuse works and why abuse is so normalised in Black families. So stay tuned for part 2. Hi everyone, and welcome back to part 2 of today's episode on autism and toxic family. So in this part, I have my mum here who is going to be sharing some of her own experiences of growing up in a toxic family upbringing. Aside from my mum sharing her experiences, we're also going to have bit of a discussion in terms of generational abuse, more so in relation to how it affects Black families in particular. So without further ado, let's begin. So do you want to start off by introducing yourself?
Hi, my name's Chevany and I'm Brianne's mum.
And how are you doing today?
So I'm doing fine today.
Okay, so are you ready to sort of talk about your experiences regarding your toxic family?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so where would you like to start? Would you like to start with your childhood?
I would say for childhood, I mostly grew up with my grandmother. Even though my mother was around, she used to work, so my grandmother used to be there, or I would need to look after the younger ones because I was older. When I say look after the younger ones in terms of make sure that they're ready for school. Sometimes I do cook dinner and iron their clothes and make sure they get ready for school. My grandmother, I would say, act as a mother and a father, because my father did not acknowledge me as being his child.
So could you sort of explain a bit more about that? What was the dynamic like between your parents?
So
Don't worry, I'll let it out.
So my dad was married. He was living with his wife with 2 children. He also had other children outside of his marital home. So my mother had me when she was, I think, around 17, 18. My father was a police officer, and he would really visit his mother but do not acknowledge me. So in terms of that, my grandmother would take on the role as a mother and a father. I remember my grandmother telling me that she used to put me into a chicken back box to sleep as a cot, which here they're called a cot for babies. Further growing up, I would go to church with my grandmother and my cousin every Friday, and would return back on Monday ready for school. So this was a weekly thing with my grandmother. My grandmother used to go and sell at a market in Kingston, Jamaica, called the Coronation Street Market. I used to tell her that my mother did not give me any lunch money. So what my grandmother would do, she would actually put money in a cloth, pin it onto my clothes, and tuck it inside to make sure that I do have lunch.
So did you ever feel that you were treated differently from the rest of your siblings?
I think when I'm older now, as an adult, I left Jamaica when I was 15 plus. So I literally didn't have my mother with me at the age of 15. So I came here to live with an aunt. And when my mother came here, that is when I feel that I was the black sheep in the family pertaining to my siblings. Now there are 4 siblings. I'm the oldest. So there's 3 girls, 1 boy. I am the oldest, and I feel that my mother do treat them
Sort of better than
the way that she treats me. I don't know if it's because I am the older one. At this current time, I don't really have a good relationship with my mother and my siblings, because I choose to take myself away from that situation, because I do not want to constantly being talked down to for in defense of the other siblings. As an adult, it did hurt. A couple of years ago, there was an incident that my mother swear to me and tell me to bring her that book to give to her because it's not mine. And this was in defense of her daughter, which is my so-called sister. She's the second child. I'm the oldest. When they're having events, for example, if it's her birthday and they're having events, I would get told about the event either the day before, and when I'm at the event, even with you, Brianne, accompanying me at the event, I do feel out of place, like I do not belong.
Because that's the same thing with myself when it came to family events. I mean, in my case, people expected me to show up and socialise, and if I didn't, I would always be asked, why don't I come out? Why don't I socialise? And then when it came to me, no one put in the effort. Like, for example, when it came to my 25th birthday, which was a couple of months ago, besides one of my aunts, no one else in the family even called to wish me a happy birthday. And I guess sometimes knowing that I've had my own fair share of experiences of being treated differently from cousins in both sides of the family, sometimes there's that part of me that always questions if I did something wrong and whether I deserved to feel loved in a sense.
In terms of you saying that, it's not always if you done something wrong. It's always that those people I would say they don't like themselves. So they try to portray themselves onto other people. So them not being in your life is not a loss, because I look at it as, I am not saying that if my so-called mother, as I'm going to say, need help in situations that I wouldn't still help, I would probably still help, but I don't think I would rush out as I used to before, because over time over time I've sort of get over being around them. I'm comfortable not being around them. I'm comfortable not going to functions with them. I mean, the last call I think I had from my so-called mother was Mother's Day, when she wished me happy Mother's Day, and I wish it back to her. But I wish that she would treat all her children the same. Yeah. Don't be biased about some of the. It's basically double standard. If your kids are having issues, you as the mother, as the adult, should sit your children down and say, okay, this is a situation, you're all siblings, you need to get along for the sake of, instead of gaslighting, favoring the others and not correcting them.
And the thing is as well, is when you have the favourite, it's like in the parent's eyes, they can do no wrong.
And so that's true.
It's, it's like if, for example, remember the situation where my so-called uncle told me to go and fuck myself. And mind you, I was going through depression. If I mentioned that to my grandmother, she would make me look like the bad person probably, and I know that.
Well, I mean, maybe I would say your other side of like grandmother, but I think if you relate it back to my so-called mother, I don't think she would sort of blame you. She would probably turn around and say, oh, but you shouldn't say that. But would she correct him?
No.
In saying that's not something that you'd say. Definitely you need to set an example. And where he's concerned, him saying that you come from a female and you're telling another female that you have loads of girl children, and you also tell them that as well to go, you tell your baby mother to go and S her mother, knowing that you come from a woman yourself. Would he like it if I turn around and say, go and F your mother? No, he wouldn't like it.
And the thing is as well, is this tends to be present in a lot of black families where there's broken dynamics. I mean, as I was saying in part one, yes, you have broken family dynamics within every race, every culture, but it tends to be very common with black families. You don't really have proper parental figures that are sort of there for their children.
And you don't have a lot of closeness as well as a family. And if us as black families would stick together with each other, we would reach a long way in life. For example, don't see someone with something and think, okay, you didn't work hard for that. I have been working since I was 15 plus. And I've only not worked for 5 years when you were born. I was around for 5 years. And you grew up, see me working, even though I do have certain conditions, for example, arthritis, but I don't allow that to stop me from pushing myself, which I do push myself a lot because I don't want to just sit around and don't do anything. And then someone in the family would see me with things and would turn around and say, oh, she have money. But at the same time, because you don't know my business,
And that's the thing.
You don't know my business, so you're gonna say, oh, you have money, but you don't know how I work for my money, because I don't go around and steal for it. I work hard for my money.
It's like myself and social interaction. You have some people that say that I don't get out of the house often, and it's not to say that I don't, because I mean, yes, I have autism and social anxiety, but 5 days a week I am out of the house.
But I don't go out of the house. I don't go out regular. I mean, I go to work 5 days a week. I go and do a little bit of shopping at the weekend, or both of us might go out, you know, and stuff like that. And we have made a pact that we will start sort of go out more frequently, go to different places. Just because you don't come out of the house doesn't mean that you don't know anything outside. And this is where people of our generation and of our culture is very naive and very ignorant about certain things, because you do have some people who do not understand well enough about autism, and I would say to them to read up about autism, because it is no point that you're gonna speak on a subject that you don't know.
And I think what it is as well, it's not just with autism, I'd say with abuse, it's heavily normalised in black families. I mean, you're kind of taught that if you're abused as a child in any way, you have to sweep it under the rug, especially when it comes to sexual abuse.
And it also depends on, because when it comes to sexual abuse, especially in our own culture in the Caribbean, Jamaica to stay, it is very difficult for children to feed back to their parents or family members to say this happened to me and so forth, because they're so backward with the sense of someone being abused. It gets thrown under the carpet. But now it's sort of start to come out a bit more. For example, there was a couple of children that was in Parliament, I don't know if it was last year or a couple months ago, who was actually bringing it forth for the attention of the Prime Minister. I don't want to go into a lot of details, but as a child, I was abused. I was sexually abused. I never acknowledge and speak to my so-called mother about it. Since being an adult, I talk about it to people that is close to me, and that I can relate to, and who's not going to judge me to say, oh, it was your fault, you know, even though it was a family member. I am a strong person, and I have never had counseling for it, and I put it at the back of my head, but sometimes certain things triggers where I still remember the scenario. But as I said, I am a strong person, and I do not allow something like that to actually hold me back.
I mean, I've never really had that experience of being sexually abused myself, and I'm glad that I haven't. But obviously, if such a thing did happen, I would feel comfortable talking to you, because you know how it feels, and you would actually stand by me. It's like,
I wouldn't judge you on that, and that's the part that I love the relationship that we do have, because we do communicate about a lot of things, and I did share with you.
And I think that's one thing that needs to be improved with black families, is communication with the children, actually taking a proper interest in a child's life and asking them if something is wrong. Instead, what tends to happen is you have lots of black parents that make their children close off their emotions, because in the black culture, it's like if you are an emotional person, according to someone within that culture, it's a form of weakness,
and you're not supposed to show your emotions. But showing your emotion doesn't mean that you're weak, and that's also not just in women, but also in male. Showing your emotion doesn't mean that you're a weak person. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. You can show your emotion, it doesn't mean that you're weak.
And for me as well, when it came to my experiences of being emotionally and verbally abused, mainly by my dad's family, I did get therapy for that. And it was in, I think, 2021, where I actually expressed to my dad how I was feeling. Because every time I tried in the past, I was met with denial. And I think having a third party helped, because he could see how his family was affecting me. And even though, like, you and my dad are divorced now, I feel like I do have a better relationship with my dad, because we still see each other. We still have regular communication on a daily basis.
And the relationship is more healthy between both of you. Which is good. And pertaining to, the way his so-called family treated you, I mean, I didn't know at the time that those things were happening.
And as I was saying, at the time, I guess as a child, I didn't know how to deal with certain situations, because obviously, according to science, the brain doesn't fully develop until you're 25. So there's certain things that you think are normal when they're not, like abuse. And it wasn't really until my late teens that I actually told you. And I remember you blamed yourself for putting me in that situation, even though I've always said it was not your fault.
No, but I mean, I did blame myself, because I feel that I should have known, or I should have seen, sign of you being verbally abused. But I think there was one incident that happened, and I think it was your dad's brother.
Yeah.
When I called him on the phone, and
I put
him in his place, and he apologized. But I don't accept that apology, because who to tell that was something that he was doing a very long time.
And it wasn't just him, it was mainly like my dad's mum, my grandma yelling at me, and sometimes it would be in public areas, like in a supermarket.
I wouldn't even associate and say anymore she's your... I wouldn't relate or give her the presence in your life to say she's your grandmother.
I don't. That's just my dad's mum.
Exactly.
That's what
because when you tend to refer to her as that, you're giving her acknowledgement like she's in your life, and she's not.
Yeah. But that's the thing, is no one in my dad's family is in my life anyway. And that's something I've come to accept, because now I think as an adult, not just with my dad's family, but with your side of the family as well, at least the majority, I'm at a point now where I've had enough of allowing toxic people into my life. And I think that's why nowadays I'm more careful with who I choose to let into my life, because there are a lot of people in this world that I feel tend to be in your life out of convenience.
Two-faced.
When they want something out of you.
Or they're being two-faced.
Pretty much. And I think that's the problem, is how a lot of people in this world have this sort of narcissistic nature that is like, you're so self-centered to a point where you don't consider how you affect other people, especially in relation to their feelings.
Well, I tend to lean towards strangers than to put my trust in family as it concern. I'm at a point in my life that I am happy in terms of any form of relationship or anything like that. I am happy. I'm at a point in my life that I am happy. I'm happy that I'm not around the people that was actually making me feel less of myself in terms of making me the black sheep.
And it's the same thing with myself. I mean, I feel that I have close family like yourself, my dad, my aunt and my great grandmother, and that's pretty much all the biological family I need, to be honest. And I do have close friends as well that have been very supportive of me in terms of hearing my experiences. Like, you know, recently I mentioned there is an Italian friend that I met online who shares like common interests in gaming and stuff. And there's this connection in the sense that we understand each other because he's had like signs of autism as well, and actually teaches and like supports kids with special needs, which is really good to hear because, you know, I've always said to you, I don't have much faith in the education system as it is. You know,
that is part of the you were part of the reason why I get into the education part in terms of working with children, because of your mild autism, and it's something that I love doing. And as you know, I spent about nearly 14 years working in private settings, 10 years in one place, and now I'm actually in a government school that I still work with children that do have those sort of disabilities. And I tend to also watch a lot of YouTube, and especially this one little boy. I think he's about 18. I think is called Big Slim. And
you told
when
me about him
exactly
before.
and when I watch the way that his mom communicates with him and the way he communicates with his mom, it's absolutely amazing. And you know, I was watching his mom today, and she was actually talking about people were coming on her page and was saying that he's not autistic. They're only saying it because they want to be on YouTube. And this again boils down to people with our own color and generation are very naive and do not understand.
Just that, it's just people stereotyping. Like with myself,
exactly.
I look like a neurotypical person, but then
What
if
does
I
a
mention,
neurotypical person looks like?
that's the thing. Like, but then if I mention I'm autistic, you know, like in school, for example, mainly secondary school, I used to get comments where people would ask me, are you disabled? Or I don't look autistic, just ignorant comments. And it's taken me a long time, even now, to sort of accept myself. I mean, recently I've been doing some talks at my workplace relating to my experiences of autism, and I'm soon going to contribute to neurodiversity training.
And that's really, really good.
You know, support people who do belong in that category. And then this podcast, of course, is something I wanted to do, not because, I want to be famous, but because I want to share my experiences and hope they can help other people that are struggling as well. And for me, it's a form of therapy because it's like I get to be myself without having to put on a mask and play a role, because I've had to do that for most of my life.
And I think it's a good idea. You know, as I said to you before, I think it was a good idea you starting at the podcast just to tell your story. You know, growing up into adulthood, and I think it is a good idea because putting it out there can also help a lot of people, a lot of mothers, a lot of families. And I would actually say to a lot of families out there, whether they're single families or immediate families, when it comes to autism or treating, you know, other siblings a certain way, they need to look into themselves. If you do not understand certain things, we as Black people, we as a community need to actually, you know, read upon things. Reading is fundamental. And if you are not educated about certain things, you cannot speak on it. I don't know everything about autism, but I still educate myself. You know, I educate myself daily on autism. And as I say again, do your research. Don't judge people. Don't see someone on the street and think, okay, oh, you don't have a disability. You don't know that, because that person, just because the person don't look disabled outside doesn't mean that they don't have a disability. Reading is fundamental. Come on guys, it's just basic knowledge.
And I think that's a great message. You know, it's very important for people to educate themselves on autism, because at the end of the day, you still have those that tend to think that autism just has one set of traits. but it's
many traits.
broad, you know. And just because you have someone that is high functioning, it doesn't mean that they need the same level of support as somebody
a person
else.
that is severe. Exactly.
I mean, I have friends who are high functioning autistic or have signs in that category, and the areas of support they need are different to my own. And, you know, I can't really speak on every autistic person's experience, just
and you
my
do
own.
also have people that are autistic, because I know someone that is autistic that is running a big company that is help people with medical conditions. And if the person didn't speak about them being autistic, you wouldn't know that they're autistic. And again, it's people being judgmental.
Yeah, and I think that's the main thing, is encouraging people to educate themselves. Well, I wanted to thank you for being on my podcast today. And of course, as I mentioned, you are one of the best people that's been in my life from day one. It's like, you know, you've always been my rock. You've always been in my corner, fighting for me to not only get the support I need in my life, but allowing me and encouraging me to thrive and go for what I want.
I appreciate being on, and I hope that you do invite me back, you know, in other topics. This is the first time actually doing it with you, and I really do appreciate you inviting me. And I would love to be on again. You know, if you're doing another topic and you want me to be on, I would appreciate it.
So I just wanted to say thank you for listening to today's episode on autism and toxic family. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I also hope that you leave some comments and feedback in terms of what you think. So on the 30th of June, which is in the next 2 weeks, I'm going to be releasing my next episode, which is actually going to be a bit different from what I normally talk about. So my next episode is going to be exploring NEETs, Hikikomori, and of course my general opinions on modern society. So until then, stay tuned, and I hope you guys all have a wonderful day. Bye!